Hello, my dear gaming enthusiasts. It's me, Onion Creature, and I'm back to share with you my thoughts on the Kirby's Return to Dream Land Deluxe video game. That's right, this one on the Nintendo Switch. Just released in March, and it's a remake of one of my favorite games ever. And so this was a hotly anticipated release for me. So let's just dive right into my detailed thoughts on this game. There's going to be some spoilers for the plot and content, so bear that in mind. I'm going to talk about Kirby's Return to Dream Land Deluxe, a game which I thoroughly enjoyed. It's a remake slash remaster slash re-release, however you want to slice it, of Kirby's Return to Dream Land on the Wii. I'm going to go over some of my broader thoughts. I had a really excellent time with this game, which is not surprising because it's one of my favorite Kirby titles. It's up there with Superstar Ultra and Forgotten Land. However, this is, a return to a classic game, one that's very important to me. It's being titled Return to Dreamland at the time was pretty appropriate since it was the first proper 2D game for quite some time in the series after a lot of spin-offs and years without major releases, and it brought back a lot of vital things and sort of set the formula going forward for the next 10 years. And even going into Forgotten Land carries over a lot of what Return to Dreamland established. I'd say a big part of that is the abilities, have lots of moves akin to Superstar, which is something a lot of the GBA and DS games didn't have quite as much of, which looking back is always disappointing and a bit strange that Superstar had all these varied moves and then they didn't really show back up in full force really until Superstar Ultra. So that's a very important part of the series. One of the bigger introductions of Kirby lore. Kirby lore, it's a thing, people make jokes about it. I do as well, because it's just funny how far down the iceberg is given the outward appearance of most iconography associated with the series. Pretty cute and simplistic looking on first glance, but obviously when you delve deeper, there's a lot going on under the surface, and much of that was established in Return to Dreamland. There's stuff like the Master Crown, the Ancients, pause screen descriptions definitely were in that game at full force. Many things were established here that have continued to be referenced and referred back to if you're into dissecting little hidden secrets to try and figure out what's going on in the Kirby universe, which is a very difficult thing to do. There's a lot of stuff going on. So yeah, phenomenal game. I loved it at the time. Tremendous amount of content, and really set the standard for what a 2D Kirby game should be moving forward. And with this new release, I was really shocked that it was coming out so soon after Forgotten Land and also Kirby's Dream Buffet, because those were pretty substantial titles, and then we have this big remake coming. I'd classify this as a remake. I think enough has been changed and added. For my personal definition, it would qualify as that. Another first impression that was divisive, and I'd say probably still is the bold outlines that have been added to characters. This was something that me and some other fans immediately picked out as being potentially a visual reference to some conceptual artwork, or I think it was an early version of Return to Dreamland, one of the iterations they did when working on Kirby GCN, where the game has the appearance of a pop-up book, and one of the main features of that is the bold outlines. Outlines have also been used in a lot of Kirby 2D artwork. If you look at the Superstar Ultra artwork and the original Superstar artwork, lots of bold outlines, and that's just been a constant trend. I believe Kirby Battle Royale also had a lot of outlines in it, so it's not as unprecedented as you might think at first glance. The fact that it's potentially a reference or an homage to that original version of Return to Dreamland, one of those possible versions, makes it really cool. And also, I think visually it looks pretty nice. It makes the game distinct from the original. I discussed that it gives the game a bit more of its own identity compared to the Wii release in terms of just visuals. And for people that didn't like the outlines, I think that once you're playing the game and once you've gone through it, you kind of forget they're there. They kind of just start becoming very natural and you don't really think about them being there. So I just got used to it. I don't know about anyone else, but that was my experience, and it just sort of became part of the visual identity of the title. I do like that the classic music has returned, and honestly, after playing the game, I think it totally fits, and there wasn't really a need to go in and totally redo all the tracks, as they've all aged pretty impeccably and sound great in this release, as they did back in 2011. I'm now going to go over the new content content that was added to this version of Kirby's Return to Dreamland. The first thing is the Merry Magoland, which is a new sub-game mode, which includes 10 different mini-games from the series past. 2 of them are new, and the other 8 are returning. This is actually a really great side mode. I really loved it. There's lots of missions to do, which act as achievements for the different mini-games. Just going through each of the different difficulty levels takes a decent amount of time, and gives you a reason to play these different mini-games. And I only played them single player, but obviously they're all multiplayer, and there's quite a good variety of different types of games here. And if you're a big Kirby fan, they'll all be familiar to you. There's some that are a bit more obscure, some that are just total classics that everyone loves. There's Checkerboard Chase is one that got a lot of attention when that was announced as being in the game because people really love that one. I'm also a fan of it. Bomb Rally, the Egg Catcher game from Kirby's Adventure, and all of these have some really wonderful remixes of music from the original sub-games, and then also in the menu of the sub-games when you click to select it, it has a remix usually associated with the game that it's from. Like for Crackety Hack game from Amazing Mirror, you get a nice Amazing Mirror remix in the menu. So lots of really great music there. I previously said that there was 10 mini-games, but technically there's 11 because the game includes Samurai Kirby and also a variant of Samurai Kirby entitled Samurai Kirby 100, in which you face off against basically the time records of 100 other players across the globe. And this is really fun, actually. You can do it once per day, which makes it kind of tense. It gives you a bit of anxiety while you're waiting to press the A button. You're like, oh my god, I gotta get a good time in, or I'm not gonna be able to play it again for another 24 hours. The effects there are fun, where you are stabbing through a multitude of Kirbys until you are finally stopped. I like that you don't have to get to the last Kirby. You don't have to beat all of them. You just have to place in the top 20, and that's how you get the mission, so it's not too ridiculous. I have not gotten to the top 100, and I think that'll be pretty difficult to do. Having it be only the top 20, I think, is reasonable and accommodating. Another weird thing about these sub-games is that they are all unlocked in the main game as well. I don't think there's any like records kept in the same way that there are in Merry Magoland. So you can play the games on all the difficulty levels, but there's no like missions or unlockable things for completing them. And it's also kind of weird that you just unlock them gradually throughout the game, because it's like, okay, you can go to Magolor's ship to play these sub games, or you could just go to Merry Magoland and they're all unlocked, and you can get achievements and in-game rewards for completing them in Merry Magoland, but not on Magolor's ship. The reason I can see for them doing that is so that you have access to all that content in the main game without having to go to Merry Magoland. Not anything that really bothers me in any particular way, it's just a bit of a strange choice. Another fun thing is that once you defeat bosses in the main game, they show up at Merry Magoland, just sort of sit around there and hang out, except for the Grand Doomer, who does not get invited. Very funny that he is not welcome at Merry Magoland. The other thing that you can do at Merry Magoland is find stickers hidden around, little hidden Magolors, get little stamps that give you rewards. Also, the stamp cards they have in the game are really fun. They have various different artworks by different artists, presumably, and they are simply delightful. Magolor in this mode is he's a fun guy because he gives you facts about different players across the globe, similar to the Wise Waddle Dee in Forgotten Land, but with this game, there's a lot more pieces of information that you can get access to. How many times the bosses have been defeated, how many Waddle Dees have been killed, how many players have visited Merry Magoland, which at first I was kind of using as a metric to measure sales for how well the game is sold, but then I realized, oh, I guess it might be also measuring multiplayer, so if you have one copy of the game but 4 people play it, that might count that as visitors, so probably not very accurate. Anyway, though, I like going to Magolor whenever I start the mode up and just see what different stats there are. And I think it's a lot better than Wise Waddle Dee just since it has so many more data points. Another thing that you can unlock by completing missions in Merry Magoland are gold statues featuring the Dream Friends that were in Star Allies, and these are basically just the models of those reused, but it's still a nice bonus and just adds a little more flair to your lobby. And you can play these mini games to unlock masks, which are a really excellent addition, and these can be worn while playing mini games in Merry Magoland and also in the main game game. You can play it in the main mode, in the extra mode, and in the arenas. That's really great. And there's a huge selection of these from across the series. There's a fair amount of really obscure characters, like the girlfriends of the animal friends who only appeared in Dream Land 3. Very funny that they're back in a modern form. Very cool to see. You get some variants, like a weird variant of Ribbon. Very unexpected there. Lots of great characters. You get a lot of bosses like Zero and Nightmare, and a fair amount of ones from Forgotten Land. Some of them have sound effects included, which is great. One of the weird things about the masks is that the masked DDD mask that you can wear, it looks like it's using the 3DS design for King DDD, so it might just be that they got the model and based the mask off that, because you can see if you look at his pupils, they're far larger than the standard King DDD mask, so that's a little weird, and it just kind of exemplifies how strange it is that King DDD's design is constantly in flux. Very strange there. Also, you can press the right stick to hide masks whenever you want, which I think is nice because you don't always want to wear the mask, and just having it be toggleable easily is very cool. In terms of the visuals, I think the game looks really great, and it also manages to run at 60 frames per second. It probably doesn't look as nice as Star Allies. That game definitely prioritized its visuals over the frame rate and was locked at 30. I really wish they hadn't done that, because as Return to Dream Land Deluxe demonstrates, you can have a really great looking game that also runs at 60 frames per second, especially when it's in a more simplistic style like Kirby is, but you still get a great deal of visual fidelity. As far as I can tell, it's running at 1080p. Just a slightly lower level of detail on some of the background objects and stuff like that, and it really did have to be 60 because the original was 60, and it really does make a big difference in making this game feel really incredible to play. I think there's more foreground elements, which is similar to the kind of thing you saw in Star Allies, and the backgrounds have all been redone as far as I can tell, and just really were stunning to look at. Some of them are really phenomenal. I love the windmill tree. That's got a nice touch up. But yeah, in terms of the main game, there's just like a lot of little changes that go a long way at making it better. Like you can skip the intro cutscene for the super abilities. They have new animations for the super abilities. And from my experience, I feel like they go faster. That could just be psychological, but I feel like cutting things with the Ultra Sword and sending out the Monster Flame, I feel like that's a bit faster, but it felt very satisfying in this game. The use of HD Rumble probably assists with that. Really great HD Rumble when you're using the super abilities, and it has the same effect as in Star Allies when you inhale an enemy and they sort of bounce around in Kirby's stomach. It's a weird idea, but I think it's executed very nicely. While I'm on the subject of super abilities, I wanted to mention something that could have been added. It probably would have been a long shot, but I really would have loved to see the inclusion of the super ability version of Cutter, which was data mined in the game's files originally on the Wii. I think there were animations and a whole 3D model for it, but it never ended up happening. So for this deluxe version, it would have been a really amazing feature to have maybe in some sort of bonus area, but obviously that didn't end up happening, and I won't complain about that too much since it would have been a pretty major thing to put into the game and figure out how to integrate it into the overall game experience. That probably would have been a bit of a challenge, so it's fine that it's not there, but that would have been something to add since this is the deluxe version of that original game. Oh well. And there's also the addition of two new copy abilities, the Sand ability and the Mecha ability. I like both of them. I wouldn't say they're the easiest to use in boss fights, but they are very powerful and they have a lot of different moves at their disposal. It definitely took me some time to adjust to them. Sand is a bit similar to water and leaf in ways, but different in other ways, so could throw me off at times, but overall, I really liked that one. Mecha is really powerful as well, and you have bombs you can send out, and lasers and all manner of things. Very unexpected additions that they added those. And there's also the Festival ability, which returns from Star Allies, which I'm assuming is included in order to commemorate the 30th anniversary of the series. Seems likely to me, so there you go. And that's just another screen clearing ability similar to Crash and Mike, which are also in the game, of course. returning. But yeah, those enemies that carry these abilities, the Sand Mecha and Festival, are just sort of placed strategically throughout the game, similar to other enemies. I don't believe Mecha shows up until World 3 or 4. Sand shows up in World 2. I think the way they introduce them is pretty good, and I like the enemy designs for the new enemies that carry these abilities. Very cute little beasts these things are, the sand guys. I like them a lot. There's a Merry Magoland Waddle Dee cart that appears in all of the different level hubs, and he can gives you access to the different masks and also the carryable items that you can bring into stages. I personally did not use this because I like the hardcore Kirby difficulty and I don't feel a need to bring items into stages with me, but obviously a great option for those who would like to have it. And then there's the new easier difficulty mode in which Magolor assists. It's called the Magolor Assist mode as far as I recall, and Magolor will pick you up out of pits if you fall into them. Your health is doubled, and Magolor shows up at the end screen. He joins you for the Kirby dance. So just nice little Magolor cameos appear also when playing that mode. Again, I did not do that for the main game. I played with it in the demo, but for the main game I stuck to the standard difficulty options. One other thing in terms of difficulty is that the game is actually technically easier now because lives are saved when you quit the game, the amount of lives, which maxes out at 99. On the Wii, all the lives that you had collected were reset to the standard number every time you closed the game or turned off the system. In a way, it's a change that is an improvement because it gives the lives that you get more value because they aren't temporary, just based on when you have the game open, and it carries over in your save file when you reopen it. But it also does make the game a bit easier because you're far less likely to see the game over screen just because you'll very likely accrue a surplus of lives pretty early on and never run out of them. So by the time I reached Dangerous Dinner, I'd reached 99 lives, and there didn't seem to be any indication of that really lowering by any significant amount. I also want to mention that the motion controls from the Wii game are here in full force for the most part. Specifically with the Super Inhale, you can shake your remote to inhale faster, and with some of the abilities like Plasma and Tornado, it affects how the ability functions. Like with Plasma, you can just shake it and you'll just have the force field around you at all times, which is very nice to have. You can also just hold the B button longer to get the Super Inhale as well. There's also some motion controls in several of the mini games, including some where they weren't present in the original version, like Bomb Rally. The new moves for Kirby's friends, King Dedede, Meta Knight, and Bandana Waddle Dee, have been added from Kirby Star Allies, where they appeared as Dream Friends. That just gives these characters a bit more distinction from Kirby's moveset, since they are based on the movesets of Hammer, Spear, and Sword. So now they just have a bit more character to themselves. It's still a bit of a shame that you can't really play as them in the main adventure if you're playing single player. They're only really available in multiplayer. Another thing that didn't really bother me, but I have definitely seen people talking about online, is the lack of online co-op, or really any online at all, except for the minor online functionality in Merry Magoland. Apart from that, it is a totally local multiplayer game, and I can see why people would be frustrated with that not being there, especially in the year of our Lord 2023. But for me personally, it's not a big deal since I don't tend to take advantage of those features even when they are available. But certainly that's a valid complaint, just not one that personally affects me. Another minor addition to Deluxe is that there's a new version of the credits, which is available upon unlocking the theater. And it's sort of like how Forgotten Land, Planet Robobot, and I believe starting in Triple Deluxe have had a sort of version of the credits available before beating the game. And it has a really phenomenal new remix included. So definitely check that out when you unlock it, because that music track is really, really quite beautiful. One of the other updates to the game is the selection of stone transformations. The classics return, but some of them have updates, like the Lore Star Cutter now features Magolor on top of it, and the statue of Mount Fuji with the HAL Laboratory headquarters now features Kirby, and it seems to be the same model that was in Star Allies, which is cool. I like seeing Kirby show up in these little cameo roles. Very, very fun. And also in a related sense, there is the Morpho Knight sword, which shows up in the Ultra Sword attack. Another thing I have to mention is that there are all new pause screen descriptions for, I think, just about every single boss has a new pause screen description. Basically, every description piece of text is new, and I really think that's great because it gives you incentive to seek those out as a returning player. For me, it felt like a very familiar experience just because I've played the game so many times beforehand, which isn't really a bad or a good thing, that's just the way it is. I will say the game does get a lot more interesting, I would say about from White Wafers on. I think the level design really picks up there, whereas beforehand it's more introductory, which makes sense. You ease players into it. The difficulty level is really, really excellent, and I think that's why I have remained such a big fan of Kirby's Return to Dreamland, even with the subsequent releases. I think just the aesthetic and the level design and the difficulty level is all really, really well tuned in this title. And that remains for Return to Dream Land Deluxe. So the core of the game still remains extremely strong in this release, which is what you want to see. Anyway, so upon beating the main game, you unlock 2 new modes, which are the arena, of course, which just has the bosses from the main game, and then Magolor Epilogue, the interdimensional traveler, which is, for me, I think the biggest selling point. This is a really big deal that we're getting new Magolor content, which shows what happened after he was defeated by Kirby, which is something that has been pretty mysterious up until this point because Magolor has shown up in the series since then in Star Allies and in DDD's Drum Dash Deluxe and in Kirby's Dream Collection and also the Kirby Clash series. I guess there was a slight explanation, but nothing too major, and this seems to be like Hal was going back and sort of lifting the curtain on this specific aspect of the series in terms of what Magolor's redemption arc looked like, which is just an incredibly exciting prospect, and I think this mode really delivers. In terms of length, it's not the most extravagant. It's probably about 2 to 3 hours to just finish it, and then a bit more just to 100% it. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It starts off with a recap of what happens to Magolor at the end of the game, and then it starts up with Magolor in his defeated form where he's got a gray cloak, it's lost all its color, and it's tattered. Magolor is in a weakened state, and he's very sad looking. Golly gee, what a sad looking guy. And he can do different emotes, which is really cool. I didn't mention this before, but the right stick functions as emote emitter. Left, right, and up and down each have different emotes. And for the main game, you can use these whenever you want. In Merry Magoland, you can use it in the lobby to wave at the Waddle Dees. And in Magolor Epilogue, it's Magolor's emotes, which are a bit more sad and forlorn than the ones in the main game, which is appropriate because it's a darker tone. With that tangent done with, going back to the Magolor Epilogue, this is basically a selection of, I'd say over 20 levels is what they said in the direct, and that's accurate. And they're short, sort of score-based levels where you try and build up combos and try and get a high score, and you can get up to a platinum medal. Some of them have unique level layouts, some of them are reused from the main game, but they all have the sort of another dimension aesthetic that we've seen in the original game. And I like that they reuse some of the enemies from the flying section at the end of Return to Dreamland as just standard enemies in Magolor Epilogue. That is kind of a resourceful use of game assets, and it works for the theming. The levels definitely were shorter than I expected, but they did work, and they have some really phenomenal music, and I like the aesthetic they crafted. It's kind of weird looking. There's some unique gameplay elements, and it's fun to see just how weakened Magolor is at the start of the game, and then you gradually earn points to level up his different attributes. By leveling up the attributes, you unlock different challenge levels, which are not scored, they're just for the purpose of basically utilizing your abilities in their strengthened state. So those are just fun things. There's also a secret Hal room. I found it by accident, and I was delighted. And there are several new boss variants, which are basically just new variants of bosses from the main game. So you have Mr. Duder as Electricky Duder, Fatty Puffer as Fiery Puffer, and then there's the gorilla guy from the main game as a water gorilla. The boss fights are pretty great. I wouldn't say it's disappointing that they reuse the same designs and its basic attack structure as bosses from the main game. I mean, it's fine, but it's a little weird that there's 3 different variants of the same boss in the same game. I don't hate it, but I could could see some people taking issue with that. Personally, I think it's fine. Don't really mind it. Works for me. And you are collecting pieces of an apple. There's 5 different apple pieces, and that's your collectible for this game, and you get them by defeating the bosses who have been collecting them for the Grand Doomer. Wow. So once you've collected all the apples, you put them together, and they've been green up until that point, and then they turn red. And I was realizing at this point, that looks actually very similar to a gem apple from Kirby Clash. Interesting. While I was thinking that, the Grand Doomer appears and eats the apple and becomes the Crowned Doomer. And these are pretty tricky boss fights, especially the later ones, obviously. But they're actually some of the hardest bosses in the game, especially with Magolor's sort of unconventional moveset. It's similar to his moveset in Star Allies, but slightly altered and less powerful, certainly, especially at the start. So you fight the Crowned Doomer, you defeat him, then the Master Crown basically appears, and it teleports you to this alternate dimension, which looks like a city. It didn't seem like any specific city that I'm aware of in the Kirby series, or it didn't look like any area specifically in the Forgotten Land or anything I could think of like that. Very weird. I'm sure there's intention behind that choice, and it's a tree boss. Yes, Kirby is known for its tree bosses, but we've never gotten a tree boss quite like this. The Master Crown is a phenomenal concept that I've always loved. It's one of the coolest MacGuffins in Kirby history. Really love it. So having a boss fight where it's the manifestation of the crown itself is really, really exceptional. The crown attacks you indirectly through its tree roots. A lot of lasers and other things happen as well. And there's one part where the tree, who is in the background for the most part, jumps onto the stage, which is crazy because it's so large that it takes up basically the whole screen. And then at the end of this, you grab one of the swords as Magolor, and it becomes the Ultra Sword that we see Magolor use in Star Allies, that sort of style. I guess also in the base game, he uses an Ultra Sword that looks like that in his Magolor Soul form. You'd use that as your final sword attack and defeat the Master Crown. Fades into flower petals. They actually showed this in the Nintendo Direct, which is kind of surprising. It's not really a spoiler out of context, but still kind of funny. And yeah, then the game is over. Magolor goes his way, the seedling of the apple, and goes through a portal, and then the credits play, and I was like, wow, that was really weird, but what is happening next? And fortunately, you get the answer to that in the credits. What happens is it shows the different pictures that come up during the credits, and it shows a summary of what happened in the main game, and then at the end of the credits you get some hints at what is actually happening, where Magolor has gone in the portal, which is he goes to the Kirby Clash world and plants the tree, the seedling of the Master Crown apple thing, and he's wearing his attire from Kirby Clash. It's basically canonizing Kirby Clash into the main series of games, which is taking this spin-off and just making it part of the main series in terms of continuity, which is pretty sick. I'm a fan of that. I'm assuming that Magolor, after being in the Kirby Clash universe, made it back to the regular Kirby universe for Star Allies and Merry Magoland. At the start of Merry Magoland, it states that it's in a time in the future, in a different setting. So it's, I don't know, like a pocket dimension in the future. Weird stuff, but I guess that way it doesn't interfere with the continuity of the main game. I don't know. Yeah, I was pretty stunned by that. HAL Laboratory really is the best at coming up with the most bizarre and unexpected ways to connect their different games together. Really rewards longtime fans, and I'm very much into it. And after you beat Magolor Epilogue, that's basically most of the new content done with. And then you go into the extra mode, which is basically the same as it was on the Wii. It's just the same game, but with harder enemies and a few other differences, like the addition of the HR D3 boss fight, which now uses the Forgotten Land King DDD boss fight track. Good extra mode. I will say that in a modern context, having played this game so many times, being told after you beat the main game, like, oh, just go beat the main game again, but it's a little different, not too different. Slightly deflating. It made more sense, definitely, in 2011, but in a modern context, I wouldn't say it feels like filler, but, you know, I wouldn't blame someone for saying that. It's probably just because I've played the game so much, but yeah, it's just playing through the start of it again. It's not a major issue, issue, but it's the kind of thing where you could hypothetically like redo the extra mode or just not include it or do something to it, but then yeah, I guess you could risk it being too different from the original game. I don't know what the solution is here, but I think it makes sense the way that HAL Laboratory has done sort of extra mode like content in modern games, like in Forgotten Land, where it's a post-game thing and it sort of happens canonically in the same timeline as the main game, where it's reusing the same levels, but it's, I would say, remixing them a bit more and making them a bit shorter and more streamlined. And I think that way of reusing levels is more effective. But I'm not really going to blame Return to Dreamland for having the extra mode, because it kind of had to. It would be weird if it didn't. But also, I'm fine with it being a thing that's left in the past. That's fine by me. I mean, it was added as sort of an homage to Kirby's Adventures extra mode and also the original Dreamland's sort of bonus mode. In that sense, it works, but in a modern context, that kind of content doesn't really make as much sense to me, at least. Return to Dream Land Deluxe also features some new dialogue from Magolor when you talk to him in the lore Star Cutter. One of the more notable ones is where he has a bit of a slip of the mask and tells you about his actual plan to use Kirby to get the Master Crown by having Kirby defeat Landia. That's pretty funny. And once you get 120 energy spheres, you also get some new dialogue. The stuff that's in the EX mode is the really good stuff, the cream of the crop here. And we get some new insights into Magolor, in that he is not actually from Halcondra. He's just spent a lot of time there. So that's a bit of insight into Magolor's backstory. And then there's also dialogue about Magolor's true dream, which, as he words it, is, "Truth be told, I want to hear the screams of everyone." Screams of joy, that is, as they visit my very own amusement park. It'd have all kind of surprises. And then he goes on to talk about a shop he wants to open and have really good deals at. Bit of foreshadowing there for the Kirby Clash series and that connection that shows up in the Magolor Epilogue. I like these new bits of writing. HAL Laboratory really knocked it out of the park with these new pieces of dialogue. I enjoy them very much. So once you've beaten the extra mode, you get the True Arena, of course. And the True Arena in this game incorporates the bosses from the extra mode and also the Magolor Epilogue. And of course, you also have the Galactonite fight in there. Galactonite, I would say he overstayed his welcome by Planet Robobot. After that, I was like, I don't really need to see Galactonite too much moving forward. I think having him in 3 games as sort of a post-game thing is fine. But past that, it's not really necessary. But obviously for this remake, you get Galactonite, and still great. Still has that wonderful theme song, which we all love. There he is. It's Galactonite, our good pal. And finally, we get to Magolor Soul. And wow, they actually added a lot to this boss fight, which was shocking to see. Basically, you start the fight and it has a new music track, a new remix of the Crowned theme, one of the most iconic final boss themes of the whole series, if not the most iconic. How great. And also he has a variety of new attacks, which I would say bring him in line with some of the final bosses we've seen in more recent Kirby games like Star Allies and Forgotten Land, where there's a lot of just, I would say, sort of bullet hell-esque elements where there's just tons of different attacks going on screen, and you have to be very careful where you stand or you will die. And he has new attacks based on the sand and mecha abilities, which is really fun to see. What a great idea to incorporate that into the Magolor Soul final boss. He now has 2 different stages, 2 different phases, and each of them has a different pause screen description. The first of them is a more standard version of a pause screen description, and the second one, the final one in the game, the final pause screen description, is sort of a plea to help from Magolor, who's pleading with Kirby to free him from the hold of the Master Crown. Very good lore stuff there. And yeah, you beat that, and the game is done. That's basically the bulk of the main content. And yeah, I was really exceptionally happy with this game. In terms of content and the value added to the experience, I think that Return to Dream Land Deluxe is comparable to Kirby Superstar Ultra on the DS, which was the previous gold standard for Kirby remakes, and this is the first proper one we've gotten since then, with the Magolor Epilogue, Merry Magoland, and some of the other minor additions. This is a worthy remake / remaster, so good on HAL Laboratory for that. I'm very pleased that we have another remake that is of the same quality as Ultra. It's also just nice to have this game on the Switch. This is the first time the game's been playable on a portable system. I think at this point in the Switch's life cycle, I don't really play it too much portably, but it's a nice thing to have, and the game looks incredibly sharp on the 720p screen. And as much as I do like Star Allies on its own terms, I definitely feel that Return to Dreamland is a far stronger title overall, so I'm just glad to have such an amazing 2D Kirby experience on Switch alongside the amazing 3D Kirby experience with Forgotten Land. In terms of missing content, there's really just one major thing, and that's Scope Shot, the sub-game from the original Return to Dreamland, which is just not in this game at all. And I have several ideas for why they might have cut it, possibly that it was too similar to other mini-games, or it just didn't make sense with the more competitive focus, as it's more of a cooperative game where you're working together to take down the boss. But it's a little bit strange that they cut that, since that's not really usual for a Kirby remake to do, is to just cut content. And in terms of mechanics, it could have worked pretty reasonably well to have it. Either way, it's not in the game. All of the music tracks are included, and there's some references to it, like the robot DDD being the one who throws the eggs at you in an egg catcher. So it still lives on in spirit, but the actual game itself is not in this, which just very weird. And like I said in one of my videos leading up to release, this does make the original Return to Dreamland on Wii have at least one exclusive thing that this remake doesn't have, which is of course the original incarnation of Scope Shot. A game I really enjoyed playing. I really liked going for high scores. That was quite a lot of fun, but just not in this version. Not a deal breaker, it doesn't impact my overall impression of the game all that much, but it is a bit weird and something that I really did not expect to be removed like that. Alright, that's my thoughts on Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe. I went quite in depth on this one, and I feel like it was worthy of that time, because this is really one of my favorite Kirby titles, and it's coming back triumphantly for the Switch with this excellent new remake. I really personally do consider it to be about a full remake. The amount of new content is pretty excellent, and I really like the new abilities, and just everything in this package comes together extremely well. The only things slightly holding it back are things that I guess are somewhat dated in its game design, in terms of the extra mode not being as compelling a piece of content as it was back in 2011, as I think Star Allies, Planet Robobot, and Forgotten Land improved on that type of formula where you replay old levels after you've beaten the main game, but they're harder versions. I think the games that came after Return to Dreamland improved on that formula. So just having it here in its more basic form is fine, but again, you know, we saw that improved in later titles in the series. Other than that though, wow, I'm just very happy that this has come out. It's a great cherry on top of the 30th anniversary of the series to bring back such a beloved title at the end of it. It's just great. I recommend this game, obviously. I'm a huge Kirby fan, so I'm biased towards it, obviously, but I think that any player will be able to get into this game. If you played the original Return to Dreamland and didn't really like it, I'm quite certain that this release will not change your mind all that much. But if you want to return to it after a while or haven't played it before, definitely it's super easy to recommend for me. One of my favorite titles on the Switch, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what HAL Laboratory does next. I'd really love to see another remake in the series with the same amount of care put into it as Return to Dreamland Deluxe had. I was kind of thinking we might get a Squeak Squad or Amazing Mirror remake, since those games I think are more flawed overall than Return to Dreamland was when it released, but I think it also makes sense to release just such a revered title in the series, one that really rebooted it into its modern form that we've had as a formula for so many years. But it also would be nice to get a remake of one of the titles from Kirby's past that's a bit less polished and maybe a bit less beloved, but could really benefit from a remake with added features and functionality and just overall gameplay improvements. I've gone over just about everything I could possibly think of for this game. Alright then, let's close the case on this game. What a great game. It really surpassed my expectations, honestly, and I'm really pleased that this has been released. Nintendo, we really love remakes and remasters of your older games. Please do more of them. I've got more Kirby videos planned, and they'll be coming to the channel reasonably soon, so look forward to those. I will catch you later.